Blushing deeply, a dark-haired young man warmly breathes the name Lilybell. Jolting awake in her bed, Lady Lucille is met by the alarmed cries of her maid shouting for her. Tears stream down Lucille's face as she gasps in sudden, panicked breaths. Outside in the daylight, a grand and imposing mansion stands proudly behind its heavy wrought-iron gates. An elegant horse-drawn carriage waits as a formally dressed footman holds the door open for the attending maids. Sunlight streams through the tall windows of a magnificent, completely deserted hallway. A gentle hand rests reassuringly over another holding a hairbrush, silently conveying complete honesty and support. Angrily brushing her mistress's hair, the loyal maid vehemently declares that having her engagement broken off is just too cruel. Fully agreeing with the sentiment, another voice affirms that the situation is truly unjust. Burdened with heavy guilt, Lucille solemnly reflects that her actions caused trouble for Raija as well. Comforting the weeping noblewoman, a soothing voice begs Lady Lucille to tell them what is wrong and to please stop crying. Steeling her fragile resolve, Lucille confirms their worries and begins to recount the events of yesterday. Flashing back to the previous evening, she vividly remembers how she was subjected to a ridiculously unfair condemnation. Under the dark, starry night sky, a massive and brilliantly illuminated royal palace looms over the capital city. Inside the lavishly decorated hall, expectant nobles gossip excitedly about His Highness Prince Bernard II's important announcement. A sudden hush falls over the opulent room as a striking presence commands their attention. Descending the grand staircase with an air of absolute authority, today's star finally makes his highly anticipated entrance. Pausing for dramatic effect, the confident prince lightly clears his throat to silence the remaining murmurs. Striking a theatrical pose, Prince Bernard warmly thanks all his esteemed guests for coming to his grand birthday party. Narrowing his eyes with intense seriousness, the prince declares that he has an incredibly important announcement for everyone gathered. A palpable wave of tension ripples through the stunned aristocratic crowd as they await the heavy news. Turning his sharp profile, Bernard prepares to deliver the crushing blow regarding the matter. Cutting off a sudden cry of protest, the prince coldly addresses his fiancée. Pointing an accusatory finger, he vows to publicly expose the misdeeds of Lucille Gustranora, daughter of the Marquis, right here and now. Utterly bewildered by the sudden attack, a wide-eyed Lucille can only stammer out a confused question. Desperately trying to clarify that she only asked him to repeat himself, she is ruthlessly cut off as he twists her confusion into an admission of her crimes. Gesturing authoritatively to the side, Bernard commands a woman named Mina to step forward immediately. Clinging tightly to a tearful, dark-haired Mina, the prince furiously accuses Lucille of using accursed dark powers to place a curse on his beloved. Cradling the allegedly frail woman, Bernard loudly proclaims to the horrified audience that poor Mina's body was afflicted and bedridden for an entire week by the dark magic. Trembling under the sheer weight of the accusations, Lucille is verbally assaulted by the prince, who asks if she thought her vile cruelty would go unnoticed. Defending her innocence, Lucille fiercely insists that she has absolutely no idea what he is talking about. She boldly reminds His Highness that he has been shamelessly flirting with the Baron's daughter every single day, leaving her with no recollection of these supposed exposed crimes. Smugly embracing his mistress, Bernard arrogantly declares that while a criminal like her normally deserves execution, he will spare her life thanks entirely to kind Mina's mercy. Adding insult to injury, he firmly insists that Lucille should be eternally grateful to the goddess like Mina for her boundless compassion. Clutching her chest as a sharp pain strikes her, Lucille flinches right as the prince loudly interjects again. Continuing his grandstand, Bernard severely warns her that avoiding execution therefore does not mean her crimes can simply go unpunished. Delivering the ultimate humiliation while holding his smirking lover, he loudly and officially annuls his engagement to Lucille. Striking a devastating final blow, he maliciously orders the shocked noblewoman to become engaged to the Margrave of Lowenhoek. A horrified gasp erupts from the nobility as they recognize the name of the notoriously cursed family. Murmuring nervously among themselves, the crowd acknowledges that while that territory is vital for national defense, its survival was in grave danger due to a lack of an heir. Facing away from the crowd, a stunned Lucille internally questions if it is really okay to treat such an important strategic marriage as a mere punishment. Looking utterly defeated and hollow, the broken girl realizes that everything she had done was pointless after all. Slipping deeper into her memories, she recalls her younger self sitting rigidly and striving to win over His Highness's heart. Reflecting on her agonizing past, she remembers following her father's strict orders all this time. Enduring physical torment, the young Lucille gritted her teeth in pain while a maid mercilessly tightened her restrictive corset. Wiping away tears while having her makeup meticulously applied, the exhausted girl desperately believed she did her absolute best. Gripped by a sudden, intense physical distress, she remembers how she tried so incredibly hard to be perfect. Snapped back to the disastrous party, Lucille panics as she realizes that letting her guard down has made her corset feel dangerously tight. Overwhelmed by the brutal accusations, she frantically realizes that if she collapses now, everyone will incorrectly assume she is merely shocked by the broken engagement. Fighting a losing battle against unconsciousness, her tear-filled eyes begin to slowly flutter shut as the overwhelming pressure claims her. Uttering a soft meow into the ethereal void, a bewildered feline awakens in a strange realm and wonders if this hazy landscape is merely a dream. Gazing down at its own delicate paws, the creature realizes with sudden clarity that it has inexplicably taken the physical form of a cat. Refusing to accept this strange and disorienting reality, a sharp wave of absolute denial washes over the startled feline. Memories of a past existence suddenly flood its mind, revealing that in a previous life, this very cat was affectionately known by the name of Lilybell. Startled by an abrupt sensation, the feline lets out a tiny gasp as unseen supernatural forces begin to pull violently at the edges of its consciousness. Swept rapidly into a swirling vortex of shifting visions, Lilybell plunges deeper into the mysterious and terrifying depths of this prophetic dreamscape. Eerie shadows dance menacingly across the sprawling void, painting a grim picture of impending tragedy that silently unfolds before the cat's wide eyes. Shattering the silence, a commanding masculine voice echoes through the darkness, demanding immediate obedience with a harsh and demeaning order to sit. The oppressive atmospheric pressure rapidly thickens as a daunting presence looms closer, threatening to crush any lingering fragments of hope. A chilling realization dawns upon the terrified dreamer that these dark, vivid premonitions reveal a terrible future that may inevitably come to pass. Glaring with undisguised contempt, a cruel man venomously declares that he hates ugly and foolish women more than anything else in the entire world. Struck heavily by the sheer malice of his unforgiving words, a suffocating silence violently crashes over the fractured and painful memory. Heartbreak radiates intensely from a sorrowful noblewoman who laments that her cold husband never truly looked at her, despite her desperate efforts. Recalling the bitter, stinging truth, she remembers how the Margrave of Lowenhoek reluctantly accepted their arranged marriage while she tried her absolute best to make it work. Enduring the agonizing neglect with quiet patience, she understood perfectly that the brooding Felix harbored a deep, unyielding hatred for women and people in general. A crippling wave of profound loneliness crashes over her as she tearfully realizes that not once did their eyes ever truly meet in genuine affection. Spitting his cruel words like toxic poison, Felix coldly sneers that he would immediately divorce her if this wretched marriage hadn't been strictly forced by His Majesty. The devastating weight of his absolute rejection shatters her fragile resolve, leaving behind only the cold, bitter ashes of a completely loveless union. Shifting the tragic course of destiny, a luminous and disruptive new presence suddenly appears to completely upend their miserable, stagnant lives. Bursting onto the scene with radiant, inescapable charm, the captivating Elvira Larash instantly commands the attention of the entire fractured household. Defying all prior expectations, the once hateful Felix rapidly falls in love with Elvira as she warmly and eagerly returns his intense affections. Taunting the ruthlessly discarded spouse, a cruel voice asks Lady Lucille if it feels utterly empty to desperately cling to the title of wife despite being completely unloved. Vicious accusations quickly fly as the hostile, gossiping crowd demands to know why the despised wife insists on making poor Felix suffer through such a miserable bond. Crushed painfully under the crushing weight of universal scorn, Lucille realizes with bitter despair that everyone will always blindly cast her as the wicked villain. Snapping violently under the relentless emotional torment, her noble spirit breaks as she fiercely resolves to become exactly the terrifying monster they all want her to be. Consumed entirely by blinding hatred and intense jealousy, her heavily suppressed dark magic explodes violently out of control to ravage the surroundings. Rising courageously to the occasion, Elvira awakens her dormant light magic and miraculously purifies the raging darkness with a wave of blinding brilliance. Condemned officially by the righteous kingdom, the tragic visionary watches helplessly as her future self is brutally executed as a great and irredeemable criminal. Stepping callously over her fresh grave, A victorious Felix triumphantly takes the radiant Elvira as his rightful, eternally beloved wife. Cheering loudly for the victorious couple, the oblivious masses wildly celebrate as the narrative abruptly ends on a sickeningly happy note for everyone else. Cementing their legendary, sweeping romance, the glorious saintess successfully lifts the curse from her destined lover, decisively defeats the villainess, and secures their happily ever after. Standing completely alone in the suffocating void of her own inevitable destruction, a heartbroken Lucille tearfully questions what will actually become of her own tragic life. Engulfed instantly by the heavy, suffocating darkness of her impending doom, she desperately searches the shadows for any lingering glimmer of hope or escape. Breaking the impossibly heavy tension, a serene and elegant voice sighs softly in exasperation at the overwhelming, suffocating melodrama of the vision. A brilliant, blinding flash of divine light suddenly pierces through the shadowy nightmare, heralding the spectacular arrival of a mystical, otherworldly savior. Staring in absolute, paralyzed awe at the radiant figure descending gracefully from the heavens, the dreamer struggles intensely to identify the majestic entity. Recognizing the benevolent, glowing savior instantly, her battered heart swells with pure reverence as she breathlessly whispers the revered name of Lady Alice. Greeting her tiny feline companion with a remarkably warm and gentle smile, the luminous Lady Alice tenderly calls out to Lilybell across the void. Curious about the sudden magical awakening, Alice ponders aloud if sharing her immense magical power is the exact reason Lilybell can now clearly witness these vivid prophetic dreams. Noticing the cat's clear distress, she gently explains that prophetic visions are naturally terrifying nightmares before asking softly if Lilybell just endured a scary dream. Growing remarkably solemn, the powerful sorceress sternly warns that those horrific visions will truly happen, pausing deliberately to offer a crucial and unexpected caveat. Striking a powerful chord of immense hope, Alice firmly and resolutely declares that these dark, looming premonitions are absolutely not set in stone. Empowering the trembling soul with undeniable, blazing resolve, she promises that a doomed, tragic future can successfully be changed through sheer willpower. Absorbing the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of this divine revelation, the dreamer's shattered spirit instantly ignites with a fierce, newly awakened determination. Opening her eyes to the bright waking world, a perfectly composed Lady Lucille murmurs quietly as the complex pieces of her fractured destiny finally fall perfectly into place. Realizing the brilliant simplicity of her divine task, Lucille resolves that all she has to do is radically change the future into a reality where absolutely no one, especially herself, sheds a single tear. Gazing confidently and sharply into her ornate vanity mirror, she fiercely vows to rewrite her tragic narrative and mercilessly crush any obstacle standing in her destined path. Acknowledging the incredibly wise guidance of her mystical mentor, Lucille smiles fiercely and agrees wholeheartedly with Lady Alice's deeply empowering words. Sitting gracefully as her loyal maid Flawless applies her expensive cosmetics, the determined noblewoman prepares to face her vicious enemies with an impenetrable mask of perfection. Lucille insists that her slightly youthful features desperately require Raja's masterful makeup skills to project the mature, unyielding authority she needs to survive. Adjusting her resolve, a determined Lucille brightly announces that it is finally time for her to go. Bowing her head in sorrow, a loyal maid softly murmurs Lady Lucille's name. Explaining their master's absence due to official duties, the devoted maids promise to properly see her off. Turning back with a warm smile, Lucille affectionately calls out to Raja. Expressing her deepest gratitude, the noblewoman wholeheartedly thanks her loyal servants for everything. Rolling steadily away from the grand estate, the elegant carriage carries its lone passenger toward a completely new destiny. Gazing thoughtfully out the small window, Lucille watches the familiar scenery slowly fade away. Gliding smoothly across the serene countryside, the carriage advances toward the distant frontier. Sinking into deep contemplation, a calm and calculated expression settles perfectly onto her youthful features. Observing her surprisingly relaxed demeanor, a voice gently notes that Lady Lucille somehow seems entirely different now. Rattling noisily along the unpaved road, the heavy wooden wheels continue their relentless journey forward. Reflecting proudly on her successful divergence from the nightmare, Lucille rejoices at securing a full 1-year delay before the dreaded marriage. Admitting playfully that she currently resembles a pushy fiancé, she rationalizes that anyone would find the situation highly annoying if the roles were reversed. Jolted abruptly from her inner musings, her wide eyes lock onto a sudden, imposing sight out the window. Peering eagerly at the towering structures, she instantly recognizes the grand estate as the Margrave's formidable domain. Uttering a soft gasp of pure awe, the awestruck noblewoman marvels at the breathtaking view. Taking in the bustling streets and well-kept buildings, she happily notes that it is quite a prosperous town. Standing tall against the horizon, the imposing fortress silently welcomes its newest, unexpected inhabitant. Calculating her promising odds of survival, she decides that living freely alone or with someone doesn't sound so bad as long as she completely avoids her worst ending. Hatching a brilliant escape plan, she happily resolves to neatly fake her death at the exact right time and simply disappear. Plotting her graceful exit strategy, she vows to quickly step aside the very moment Elvira finally appears. Drawing immense comfort from her past, she smugly reminds herself that she was a carefree cat in her previous life. Shattering the peaceful silence, a deep and commanding voice suddenly declares that she has come a very long way. Startled violently by the sudden interruption, Lucille gasps as she instantly recognizes the heavy weight of that voice. Turning around slowly, she finds herself staring directly at a towering and incredibly intimidating male figure. Piercing through her very soul, a pair of fiercely cold eyes locks intensely onto her fragile form. Radiating an absolutely terrifying aura, the hardened warrior stands silently like an unmovable mountain of pure authority. Trembling slightly under his overwhelming presence, the wide-eyed girl struggles desperately to find her voice. Commanding the space with absolute dominance, the man proudly introduces himself as Felix Lowenhoek, the absolute lord of this land. Stammering awkwardly in response, a flustered Lucille lets out a tiny, involuntary gasp. Bowing gracefully despite her nerves, she formally introduces herself as Lucille Gustranora and politely expresses her pleasure in meeting him. Struck instantly by his devastatingly good looks, her inner voice wildly praises his absolutely perfect face. Fangirling intensely in her mind, she ecstatically notes that he is even more incredibly attractive than Elliot, the handsome tomcat from her past feline life. Sweeping her gaze over his impressive physique, she absolutely marvels at the sheer power of his robust body. Returning her focus to his striking features, she finds herself completely captivated by his flawlessly chiseled face. Staring deeply into his intense gaze, she becomes utterly mesmerized by those incredibly sharp, captivating eyes. Overwhelmed completely by his sheer masculine magnetism, she happily declares that her dormant feline instincts are going absolutely wild. Shattering her completely inappropriate daydream, Felix harshly clears his throat to sharply regain command of the conversation. Setting a brutally strict boundary immediately, he firmly states that His Majesty has already briefed him entirely on her situation. Delivering a ruthlessly cold insult, he venomously declares that he hates ugly and foolish women like her the absolute most. Blinking in cheerful confusion before swiftly recovering, Lucille beams brightly and enthusiastically thanks him very much. Brushing off her own momentary lapse, she smoothly assures him that she understands her delicate position perfectly well. Narrowing his sharp eyes in deep suspicion, the bewildered lord quietly questions her unexpectedly cheerful acceptance. Accepting her seemingly obedient response, Felix remains entirely oblivious to the secret, rebellious joy bubbling beneath her composed surface. Plotting mischievously in her head, Lucille privately decides there is absolutely no harm in thoroughly enjoying this fiancé life until his destined heroine finally arrives. Embracing her temporary role with vibrant enthusiasm, she firmly concludes that not enjoying herself would be a complete and utter waste. Basking shamelessly in the glorious presence of her incredibly handsome, albeit hostile, partner, she eagerly anticipates the chaotic days ahead. Smiling slyly to herself, she attributes her unshakable resilience entirely to her carefree previous existence as a simple cat. Stepping boldly into the grand estate, the highly unusual and perfectly temporary fiancé life of Lucille officially begins. Standing tall against the uncertain future, the reborn noblewoman confidently embraces her new, completely rewritten destiny. Rustling through the air, an unseen observer watches the newly arrived guest with deep scrutiny. Peering intensely from the shadows, a hidden figure critically identifies the girl as Felix's new fiancée. Glaring with immediate disdain, the watcher coldly declares their utter dislike for the young noblewoman. Stripping away her restrictive garments, a thoroughly relieved Lucille happily stretches in her comfortable everyday clothes. Gazing out the window with wide eyes, she enthusiastically marvels at the estate's lush and beautiful greenery. Expecting a dark and dirty punishment room, she playfully admits to herself that she actually enjoys cramped, gloomy spaces. Pausing her cheerful thoughts, a sudden realization creeps into her observant mind. Scanning her strangely vacant surroundings, she completely fails to spot a single servant in the vicinity. Mapping out the sprawling estate in her head, she questions if the detached garden is intentionally placed this far from the main house to maintain such eerie silence. Straining her ears against the oppressive quiet, she begins to deeply suspect the total absence of life around her. Breaking the isolation, a magical communication crystal suddenly activates as a polite voice announces their assignment to care for her. Brightening instantly at the welcome sound, Lucille warmly greets the maid who introduces herself as Sarah. Holding the glowing device delicately, the isolated noblewoman inspects the magical artifact with intense curiosity. Instructing her new charge efficiently, Sarah firmly requests that Lucille use the crystal whenever she needs absolutely anything. Channeling her magic effortlessly into the base, Lucille notes the expensive craftsmanship expected of a wealthy Margrave's estate. Releasing the magical connection, she watches the crystal's brilliant light slowly fade back into complete dormancy. Waiting patiently for further instructions, she sits completely alone in the creeping silence of her new chambers. Testing the boundaries of her isolation, she calls out loudly for Sarah into the empty air. Raising her voice even higher, she tosses a bright hello into the desolate hallways to absolutely no avail. Faltering slightly in her confident facade, a quiet hum of uncertainty escapes her lips. Grasping the true extent of her situation, she frantically realizes that she has been left entirely alone in the massive estate. Accepting her bizarre reality, a calm sense of understanding quickly washes away her initial panic. Deducing her host's petty strategy, she correctly guesses that Felix ordered the servants to ignore the demanding woman from the vicious rumors. Flashing a remarkably defiant smirk, a fierce spark of pure rebellion ignites within her spirited heart. Fueled entirely by sheer stubbornness, she fiercely resolves never to call for anyone's help. Picturing his devastatingly handsome face, she gleefully forgives the hostile lord for his terrible personality. Relishing her newfound independence from oppressive princess training, she celebrates the absolute freedom of being completely ignored. Drifting into a sea of old memories, the heavy concept of loneliness sparks a profound reflection on her past life. Remembering her time as a feline, she asks the spirit of Lady Alice if she hated the crushing weight of isolation. Echoing through the corridors of time, the immortal Lady Alice mournfully confesses her deep hatred for living alone across 1,000 years. Standing solemnly against a magical backdrop, the legendary sorceress radiates both immense power and profound sorrow. Gazing downward with a heavy heart, Alice contemplates the agonizing burden of her unnaturally long existence. Sighing gently into the void, she accepts the overwhelming strangeness of her own magical nature. Acknowledging her eccentric reputation, the mighty spellcaster chuckles bitterly at being called the strange Lady Alice. Shattering the fragile peace of those ancient days, Lucille solemnly recalls how the beloved Lady Alice was brutally killed. Plunged back into the cold reality of her feline existence, the little cat Lilybell found herself completely and utterly alone once again. Snapped out of her solitary despair, a new and unexpected voice suddenly pierced the quiet wilderness. Delighted by the adorable white kitten, a towering figure joyfully mistakes the magical beast for a mythical fairy. Sweeping the feline into a grand adventure, the great Saintess Clarissa lovingly claims Lilybell as her own. Leaping forward through the eras, her third owner triumphantly presents a massive, delicious red griffin as the day's glorious catch. Shifting to a life of commerce, the great merchant Conrad strictly lectures the cat on the crucial business tactic of hiding one's true thoughts. Basking in royal luxury, Princess Rosalia eagerly gossips with Lilybell about a wonderful man she just met. Experiencing bizarre new worlds, the otherworlder Hinako excitedly recommends a fascinating foreign book to her feline companion. Braving deadly battlefields, the mighty hero Ephron proudly praises Lilybell for successfully tracking down the Demon King's hidden location. Reaching the end of her incredibly long journey, the ancient cat finally settled down with an impoverished, nameless orphan. Purring softly in the child's desperate embrace, she felt truly fortunate to stay securely by his side. Uncovering a horrifying truth, she discovered the innocent boy was being viciously raised as a human sacrifice for demon summoning. Springing fiercely into action during the dark ritual, the brave feline threw herself directly into the magic circle to protect her master. Consumed entirely by the chaotic magical forces, the heroic cat bravely met her absolute end. Snapping completely back to the present, a reincarnated Lucille silently wonders how many years have passed in this world since that fateful sacrifice. A poised and ethereal woman named Alice gazes forward with a calm yet striking intensity, her mind drifting to another time. Reflecting deeply on her past, she realizes with profound warmth just how much genuine affection she truly received. Having lived a long and cherished life as a beloved feline, Lady Alice boldly declares that she no longer feels any lingering emptiness or loneliness. A quiet realization washes over her soul as she contemplates the exact reason behind this newfound, unshakable peace. She fondly remembers her past life, proudly noting that she was revered and spoiled as the most beloved cat in the entire world. Suddenly, a mild sound of curiosity escapes her lips as something unexpected catches her eye. Inspecting a magically warded pantry that prevents food from spoiling, she notes the Margrave's subtle mercy and eyes the delicious white bread locked safely inside. Fidgeting anxiously as dark memories surface, she recalls how her cruel father frequently punished her by maliciously withholding her meals. Her fragile stomach rumbles violently, breaking her train of thought as intense, painful hunger suddenly kicks in. Startled from her reverie, she stares down in utter bewilderment at a tiny, squirming caterpillar resting innocently in the palm of her hand. A brilliant spark of sudden, desperate inspiration flashes across her wide, determined eyes as survival instincts take over. Dashing excitedly through the grand estate doors, she frantically searches for a specific location she knows must be hidden nearby. Her delicate face lights up with sheer, unadulterated joy upon discovering a perfectly maintained and lush vegetable garden. Deducing cleverly that caterpillars indicate tasty crops, she triumphantly locates the bountiful garden tucked right behind the manor's kitchen. She marvels breathlessly at the vibrant, carefully cultivated greenery sprawling endlessly before her hungry eyes. A harsh, booming voice suddenly echoes through the leaves, aggressively demanding to know who is messing around and trespassing in the pristine garden. Trembling with immediate fright, the poor girl freezes in absolute, wide-eyed panic at the sudden and terrifying confrontation. An imposing, elderly gardener wearing a battered straw hat steps from the shadows, glaring menacingly at her trembling, fragile form. The furious gardener suddenly pauses mid-shout, his aggressive anger dissolving into pure, stuttering confusion as he finally recognizes the noble intruder. Cornered and terrified out of her wits, she lets out a pitiful, panicked meow in a desperate, instinctual bid to defuse the escalating tension. The narrative perspective suddenly shifts away from the garden, revealing the grand, imposing architecture of a magnificent domed manor building. Inside an opulent office, a humble maid bows nervously before her imposing lord, who formally apologizes for his long absence during a grueling monster subjugation campaign. The dark-haired lord seamlessly transitions to domestic matters, sternly asking the maid for a status report on Lucille Gustranora, the Marquis's controversial daughter. Sweating profusely under his gaze, the maid stammers out that there have been absolutely no issues during Lucille's first week at the Grand Estate. The sharp-witted lord narrows his eyes instantly, easily detecting the heavy, guilt-ridden hesitation lacing the maid's shaky voice. He presses the interrogation further, demanding to know exactly how much of his vast fortune the allegedly extravagant woman has selfishly squandered. When sharply asked if the notoriously difficult noblewoman has complained about the estate's food, the flustered maid quickly and emphatically denies it. The lord continues his relentless, rapid-fire questioning, probing to see if she has made any unreasonable or taxing demands of the staff. Astonished by the continuous stream of denials, he leans forward and asks if the supposedly wicked woman has violently struck any servants. A heavy, deeply oppressive silence fills the grand office as the terrified maid bows even deeper under his piercing, suspicious gaze. A dark, horrifying realization dawns on the weary lord as the terrifying truth begins to seamlessly piece itself together in his sharp mind. He violently slams his hands onto the desk, enraged by the sudden realization that his trusted staff has completely and utterly neglected their noble guest. The terrified maid collapses to her knees in sheer panic, desperately begging for his mercy with her deepest, tearful apologies. Utterly shocked, the lord wonders why a rumored villainess known for summoning servants, lashing out, and wasting money would silently endure such terrible treatment without a single word. The trembling maid tearfully explains that she only responds to crystal summons, noting that the lady has remained entirely and quietly secluded in the detached residence. Filled with immense, crushing guilt over his staff's horrific negligence, the Lord sincerely apologizes for his own catastrophic oversight. Suddenly, a cheerful man bursts into the room, interrupting the tense atmosphere by playfully teasing the gloomy Lord for making a poor maid cry. The blonde newcomer, Kane, mockingly brandishes a physical report and laughingly calls his stressed friend a truly terrible master. The utterly exhausted Lord drags a heavy, gloved hand across his face, sighing deeply as a massive headache begins to throb at his temples. Regaining his strict composure, the Lord dismisses the matter and formally orders the sniffling maid, Sarah, to prepare fresh tea in the reception room. Warm, golden sunlight streams elegantly through the tall, luxuriously draped windows of the manor's quiet and immaculate reception room. Kane slides a detailed report across the polished table, explaining that it contains the regionally sorted list of dangerous monsters subjugated over the past month. Sipping his tea, Kane offers to assign his own squad as guards, noting with deep concern that while the monsters won't reach town, their numbers are steadily and alarmingly increasing. Kane cheekily compliments the crying maid's surprisingly good tea, prompting a sharply irritated, silent glare from his thoroughly exhausted friend. The dark-haired Lord slumps slightly in his plush chair, openly and uncharacteristically confessing his absolute physical and mental exhaustion from the relentless campaigns. Kane nods knowingly, bringing up the lingering, unresolved political headache regarding the severe punishment recently decided by the Second Prince. The brooding Lord raises his gloved hand into the streaming light, his handsome expression hardening as he silently contemplates his incredibly heavy burdens. A sharp, intense glint flashes dangerously in the Lord's weary eyes as a sudden, calculated thought quickly crosses his sharp mind. Kane pauses mid-sip, his relaxed and teasing expression instantly shifting to one of mild surprise at his friend's sudden, dark change in demeanor. Breaking the brief, heavy silence, Kane casually reveals that the highly controversial fiancé they were just discussing is currently wandering aimlessly in the garden. Kane fixes Felix with a piercing stare, casually demanding to know if he has finally spoken to her. Felix grits his teeth in silent frustration, his face contorting into a strained and heavy grimace. Defending his delay, Felix grumbles that relentless monster hunting left him no time, while Kane sharply tells him to drop the sour expression. Kane smirks that his friend's twisting expressions are quite telling, casually preparing to dispatch official documents to the king. Turning his focus fully back to the immediate issue, Kane flatly orders Felix to go talk to her. Felix lowers his gaze in silence, the heavy weight of his neglected duties pressing down on his broad shoulders. Retorting sharply, Felix declares he already planned to visit her after their meeting, prompting Kane to laughingly admit his advice was unnecessary. The conversation shifts entirely to their controversial guest, invoking the notorious name of Lucille Gustranora, the Marquis's daughter. She is infamous throughout the royal capital as a foolish, vile villainess whose reputation precedes her every move. Despite being the prince's fiancée, rumors paint her as a lazy, ignorant, and arrogant woman utterly lacking in refinement. Shifting suddenly to the sunlit garden, Lucille enthusiastically waves her hands at the gardener, eagerly asking if her work is okay. Peering from the shadows, Felix watches in absolute disbelief as the gardener praises her perfection, to which a beaming Lucy proudly agrees. Bewildered by the scene, the observing Margrave questions silently if this cheerful, hard-working girl was always like this. Analyzing her appearance, he notes she looks much thinner and lacks her usual flashy makeup, yet her complexion glows with surprising health. Shaking off his distracting thoughts about her looks, Felix forcibly redirects his focus to a far more startling anomaly. His sharp eyes lock onto Randolph, the notoriously stubborn and deeply eccentric gardener who has served the Lowenhoek estate for years. A massive, shockingly warm smile stretches across the usually grumpy gardener's face, leaving the observing lord utterly speechless. Staring in sheer disbelief, Felix realizes he has never once seen that joyful expression as the bubbly girl cheerfully calls him Grandpa Ran. Gesturing excitedly toward the lush vines, Lucille asks for permission to eat the garden's tomatoes, earning a quick nod of approval from the delighted old man. Felix coldly reflects that his cursed land only grows crops due to Randolph's meticulous care, though they notoriously never bear any fruit. Firmly believing that barrenness is the unchangeable natural order, Felix suddenly spots something utterly impossible happening in the vines. A sharp gasp catches in the Margrave's throat as sheer shock ripples violently across his hardened features. His eyes widen in utter disbelief as he realizes the impossible vines instantly bore rich fruit the very moment her hand hovered over them. Frantic questions race through the Margrave's mind as he desperately tries to comprehend what incredible magic the infamous woman just unleashed. Staring intensely at her delicate profile, he mentally demands to know exactly who this mysterious girl truly is. Completely oblivious to her hidden audience, Lucille gently cradles the freshly materialized, brilliantly red tomato in her small palms. She inspects the vibrant, impossibly ripe fruit with sheer, unadulterated delight radiating from her sparkling eyes. Opening her mouth wide, she takes a massive, unapologetic bite out of the juicy, magical harvest. Her cheeks puff out adorably as she happily chews the fresh vegetable, her face lighting up with genuine bliss. Savoring the explosion of flavor, the former villainess closes her eyes and hums in pure, unfiltered culinary satisfaction. Throwing her arms up in jubilation, she loudly and enthusiastically declares the miraculous tomato to be absolutely delicious. Roaring with hearty laughter, Randolph proudly agrees that the exquisite taste is exactly what one expects from his carefully tended garden. The jovial atmosphere breaks slightly when the curious old gardener suddenly asks Lucy exactly how she made the barren plants bear fruit. Lucille freezes instantly, her bright smile faltering as a sudden wave of panic violently interrupts her happy chewing. When Randolph asks what is wrong, she nervously brushes off his concern, frantically trying to mask her slip-up. Glancing cautiously toward the manor, she mutters quietly that she suddenly felt the heavy presence of someone watching her from the shadows. The scene sharply cuts away, snapping back to the elegant interior of the manor's grand hallways. Kane casually spots his returning friend, cheerfully welcoming an exhausted-looking Felix back from his garden observation mission. Leaning against the corridor wall, the blonde knight smoothly asks the returning Margrave exactly how the long-awaited conversation went. Pressing for details, Kane raises an expectant eyebrow, genuinely curious if the confrontation with the notorious lady finally worked out. Exploding with sudden, explosive fury, Felix violently startles Kane, making the knight yelp in sheer surprise. Dark shadows obscure the Margrave's fiercely glaring eyes, his entire body trembling with an uncontrollable, overwhelming surge of blinding rage. Clenching his fists tight, Felix roars furiously that he is going to forcefully throw that wretched woman out of his estate immediately. Transitioning to a quiet kitchen, Lucille stares intently at her gathered ingredients, her mind completely absorbed in a new culinary puzzle. Her eyes spark with bright inspiration as she confidently decides to substitute an ingredient, planning to pour the mixture into a mold and bake it. Clapping her hands together in sheer excitement, she happily anticipates the delicious results of her brilliant baking experiment. A sudden, sharp ring of the doorbell shatters the peaceful quiet, prompting her to call out while curiously wondering who could be visiting. Pulling the door open, she freezes in pure, wide-eyed astonishment at the towering figure standing ominously on her doorstep. Mentally thanking the heavens that she used magic to quickly change her clothes, she stares up at the intimidating Margrave Lowenhoek. Towering over the small girl, Felix formally and coldly announces his immediate desire to speak with Lady Lucille Gustranora. Standing ominously at the doorway, the imposing Margrave Lowenhoek looms over the startled Lucille. His piercing gaze locks onto her delicate form, radiating an overwhelming and unreadable intensity. Meeting his striking eyes, Lucille feels a sudden jolt as she takes in his rugged, captivating features. A deep flush spreads across her cheeks as she silently marvels at his breathtaking appearance. Her heart flutters wildly in her chest, fully acknowledging just how unbelievably handsome Felix truly is. Desperately trying to steady her racing pulse, she realizes it has been ages since a man's proximity excited her this much. Suddenly, a blonde knight casually peeks out from behind the towering Margrave, letting out a mild hum of surprise. Observing her closely, Kane remarks aloud that the lady standing before them completely contradicts everything Felix had claimed. Shooting his boisterous aide a dangerously sharp glare, Felix silently warns the knight to watch his tongue. Stepping forward with a smooth smile, the blonde man formally introduces himself as Kane Purcell, Felix's trusted aide and knight. Bowing with effortless charm, Kane warmly invites the blushing noblewoman to address him simply by his first name. Playing the role of the perfect lady flawlessly, Lucille politely returns the greeting while privately noting his undeniable, yet unappealing, charm. Standing silently in the background, Felix intensely scrutinizes the polite exchange between his cheerful knight and the infamous villainess. Breaking the amiable atmosphere with a single, sharp word, Felix gruffly demands their immediate attention. His brow twitches in visible irritation as he asks just how long they plan on smiling and staring at each other. Startled by his sudden dark tone, Lucille gasps and quickly snaps her attention back to the imposing Margrave. Mentally kicking herself for staring shamelessly at another man, she quickly assumes Felix furiously hates seeing a villainess near his precious aide. Attempting to diffuse the rising tension, she earnestly assures Felix that she has absolutely no intention of meddling with his trusted subordinate. Struck entirely speechless by her bizarre conclusion, Felix simply stares down at her in absolute, dumbfounded silence. A heavy scowl returns to his striking face as he mutters bitterly that she has completely misunderstood his frustration. Oblivious to his actual grievance, Lucille bows politely and promises never to interfere with their clearly special relationship. Sweating profusely at her wild implication, a flustered Cain desperately clarifies that he and his lord are not involved in any suspicious romance. Watching the two men awkwardly scramble to correct her, Lucille simply smiles in quiet amusement at their tight-knit bond. Clearing his throat loudly, Felix forcibly steers the derailed conversation back toward its original, serious purpose. Regaining his commanding posture, the Margrave firmly orders both his knight and his guest to focus on the matter at hand. Completely ignoring his authoritative shift, Lucille cheerfully claps her hands together and suddenly asks if they enjoy eating sweets. The sudden, incredibly mundane question leaves both battle-hardened men blinking in sheer, synchronized bewilderment. Recovering quickly, Cain casually admits his mild appreciation for treats, while a visibly confused Felix simply grunts his agreement. Beaming with pure excitement, Lucille proudly announces that her freshly baked desserts are finally ready and enthusiastically invites them to partake. Realizing she hasn't prepared any tea to accompany the treats, the energetic noblewoman suddenly spins around and sprints back toward the kitchen. Watching her retreating form disappear down the hallway, Cain blankly states the glaringly obvious fact that their host has vanished. Turning his sharp gaze back to his stoic lord, Cain honestly admits that the rumored villainess doesn't seem like a bad person whatsoever. Dropping his playful demeanor entirely, the blonde knight seriously questions if Felix still intends to forcibly expel her from the estate. A chaotic diagram of Felix's protective logic flashes by, revealing his stubborn belief that an innocent girl simply cannot remain in his cursed lands. Sensing the fierce, misplaced protectiveness swirling behind his friend's hardened glare, Cain softly calls out his name. With a knowing smile, the observant knight gently advises the stubborn Margrave to finally start being completely honest with his own heart. Bursting brightly back into the room, Lucille excitedly announces her return while carefully balancing a heavy tray of treats. Resting elegantly on the silver platter are perfectly golden, steaming blocks of freshly baked sponge cake. Staring in absolute awe at the professional quality desserts, Cain asks in disbelief if the noble lady truly baked them entirely alone. Cain's mind races as he tries to reconcile the cruel, lazy villainess of royal rumor with the hardworking, talented baker standing before him. Interrupting his mental spiral, Lucille cheerfully pushes a delicate plate toward the knight, insisting he take the very first bite. Placing a soft piece into his mouth, Cain's eyes immediately blow wide open as a violent explosion of sweet flavor assaults his senses. Overwhelmed by the exquisite taste, Cain eagerly demands to know the name of the magical dish, which Lucille proudly identifies as Castella. Turning her warm, inviting smile toward the towering Margrave, she gently offers him a beautifully plated slice of the golden cake. The stoic lord silently inspects the delicate pastry before slowly shifting his intense, penetrating gaze back up to her hopeful face. Without uttering a single word, Felix reaches out, plucks the sweet treat from the plate, and takes a slow, deliberate bite. A rare, genuine softness briefly touches his hardened features as he quietly admits the dessert is truly delicious. Watching them enjoy her baking, Lucille fondly remembers Hinako, the benevolent otherworlder who carefully taught her the precious recipe. Filled with newfound culinary confidence, she excitedly realizes she might also be able to perfectly recreate the beloved dishes of her past owner, Matthew. Having finished his portion, Felix sets the empty porcelain plate down and instantly allows his heavy, authoritative aura to return. Breaking the comfortable silence, the dark-haired lord speaks up with a sudden, deeply serious tone. He fixes her with an unblinking, heavy stare, boldly declaring that his sudden visit today has a very specific, solitary purpose. Bowing his proud head slightly, the intimidating Margrave completely shocks the young lady by offering her a profound, sincere apology. Lucille lets out a small gasp as she registers the sudden shift in the room's tense atmosphere. Bowing deeply, the imposing Margrave sincerely apologizes for his many acts of severe discourtesy. Caught off guard, Lucille genuinely questions if the stoic lord actually committed any offenses worthy of such a solemn apology. Her mind races as a flood of past grievances suddenly surfaces, proving that his harsh actions absolutely warrant true remorse. Watching the towering noble humbly lower his head, her cautious heart softens completely. She mentally notes that his current gentle demeanor heavily contradicts the cruel man she witnessed in her prophetic dream. A flicker of hope sparks in her mind as she cautiously considers the possibility that her dire premonition was completely mistaken. Felix maintains his deep bow, firmly stating that his previous cold attitude toward her was entirely unacceptable. The Margrave admits his utter failure in showing consideration or compassion, confessing he cruelly denied her proper servants despite her arriving completely alone. He marvels at her unwavering grace, noting she never once complained or showed displeasure at his sudden, unannounced visit. A wave of panic hits Lucille as Felix bows so low his head nearly smashes into the table, deeply ashamed of blindly believing the vicious rumors. Internally celebrating her current situation, Lucille relishes her comfortable days and the absolute privilege of admiring the handsome Felix. She beams with pure satisfaction, happily accepting his potential hatred as long as she successfully avoids the disastrous future. A heavy, contemplative silence momentarily settles over the room as both nobles process the weight of the profound apology. Felix slowly raises his head, his sharp eyes locking onto her bright, unexpectedly unbothered expression. Breaking the quiet tension, the Margrave gently acknowledges that she likely harbors many complicated thoughts regarding his severe mistreatment. Leaning in slightly, he earnestly requests that they slowly and cautiously grow closer over time. Fixing his intense gaze upon her, the dark-haired lord softly asks for her honest opinion on his hopeful proposal. Blushing furiously, Lucille screams internally over how incredibly devastating his troubled, serious expression truly is. Romantic trance. All washes over her as she fully appreciates his breathtakingly handsome appearance and genuinely noble personality. Rooting for his ultimate happiness, she passionately hopes he quickly meets Elvira, the true heroine of fate. Her cheerful thoughts abruptly halt as a stunning, unintended consequence of his request suddenly strikes her racing mind. Realizing her grand plan to quietly disappear upon Elvira's arrival is now in severe jeopardy, a frantic panic suddenly sets in. A vivid mental image of the beautiful Elvira standing beside the handsome Felix completely overrides her frantic thoughts. Basking in the glorious fantasy of the perfect couple, her face lights up with absolute, unadulterated joy. Startled by her sudden, intense silence, Felix tentatively calls out the young noblewoman's name. Snapping back to reality, Lucille fiercely slams her hands onto the table and eagerly leans toward the bewildered Margrave. Eyes sparkling with pure excitement, she loudly and enthusiastically declares that she would absolutely love his proposal. Thrusting her hands forward in sheer joy, she boldly announces her immense desire to become genuine friends with him. A mental image of a cheerful, platonic friendship instantly solidifies in her happily oblivious mind. Cain eagerly jumps into the fray, celebrating his own inclusion in her friendly declaration while Felix glares in absolute shock. Later, Felix stands silently in the manor halls, deeply reflecting on the chaotic, unexpected outcome of his formal apology. The stoic lord mentally replays her enthusiastic words, silently wondering if he approached the delicate situation correctly. Cain leans casually against the wall, openly admiring the fact that Lady Lucille truly turned out to be a wonderfully good girl. Turning a sharp eye to his brooding friend, the blonde knight playfully notes that the vibrant lady seems entirely uninterested in him romantically. Felix crosses his arms defensively, coldly declaring that her utter lack of romantic interest is absolutely no problem at all. Cain smirks knowingly, teasing the incredibly stiff Margrave for managing the delicate conversations surprisingly well. Dropping his playful tone, Cain bluntly warns that while there are no immediate problems, there is also absolutely zero hope for a romantic future. Sighing at his friend's legendary social ineptitude, the knight acknowledges Felix's severe struggle with basic human interaction. Stepping closer, Cain seriously explains that a simple apology only manages to convey roughly half of a person's true intentions. He aggressively insists that Felix should have explicitly and clearly told Lady Lucille that he no longer hates her. Felix sharply dismisses the advice, stubbornly claiming there is no need to correct anything since he allegedly feels nothing toward her. Cain stares deeply into Felix's unwavering eyes, searching for any crack in the proud lord's impenetrable emotional armor. Shaking his head in absolute certainty, Cain solemnly predicts that Felix will deeply regret his profound stubbornness today. The Margrave turns away sharply, his striking features hardening into an expression of unyielding, stoic resolve. Pulling on his riding gloves, Felix darkly mutters that he already lives with crushing regret every single day. His mind plunges into darkness as he silently curses the horrific, inescapable curse placed upon him since the exact moment of his birth. Meanwhile, in an opulent room far away, an elegant lady freezes as a shocking piece of news absolutely shatters her composure. Her terrified maid violently recoils as a menacing, dark aura explodes from the suddenly furious Lady Alice. Trembling with blinding rage, Alice fiercely commands her servants to immediately prepare a carriage for a massive, sudden emergency. Clenching her fists in furious obsession, she viciously declares that she alone is destined to be Felix's true maiden.